Welcome back to the long walk to Cambridge Gate here at Windsor Castle, where we spent the weekend, obviously, covering the funeral of Prince Philip. And Lizzie, as I said on the news last night, it's sometimes really hard to find the words to sum up quite what we witnessed here yesterday, isn't it?
Yeah, it was an incredibly poignant and moving day, but an incredibly personal one as well, not just for the family, but all the little personal notes we saw threaded throughout the procession and the service nodded to the Duke of Edinburgh throughout, I thought.
Yeah, exactly. There's, we told you before about the Land Rover. We knew about the Land Rover, but there was a moment when it went through the George IV gate. In fact, we can show you where the gate is. If I just get Marcia, you can just about see behind the fence there. This is the George IV gate. At the end of the long walk, and it was through that the Land Rover, the green Land Rover, drove at about 2:30 on Saturday afternoon. The colour of which was, I always forget this, it was dark bronze green as opposed to the Belize green that it started out being, and the Duke of Edinburgh, being the Duke of Edinburgh, wanted the colour change for it to be a bit more military. But from that moment, from when the Land Rover went through the gates you just saw up there, to everything else, to the service detachments, the horse. I mean, tell us about the horse and carriage that were there.
Well, it's well known how much Prince Philip loved his carriage driving, and of course there was a nod to that in the quadrangle. Two of his fell ponies. There was.
Can you remember the name?
I can. Balmoral Nevis and Not Law Storm, and they were two of his fell ponies with one of his carriages.
And there was a really poignant little touch, wasn't there?
There was his gloves and his little red pot for his sugar lumps that he used to feed the ponies, and they were just laid out on the carriage, and I thought that was a really, really lovely touch.
And that was at the start of the procession as it sort of stepped off, as they say in the military terms. Now, before that, the coffin had been carried by a bearer party formed of the Grenadier Guards from the state entrance of Windsor Castle, and that moment, it's probably worth just having a watch of it now, and in the silence that it deserves, the moment the coffin came out of the state entrance of Windsor Castle on Saturday afternoon. So we will run through with you the full funeral details, and we were actually wondering what's the best way to sort of sum up the funeral without having to replay the entire hour and a half. And what we might do when we get to that point is actually just play you the summary that we had on the news on Saturday night, about 6 minutes long. So if you're watching this on YouTube, then you can watch it, obviously. If you're listening on a podcast as you're bouncing along on your run, then you can also kind of get a sense of exactly what happened and all the key points of the funeral. We'll come to that in a minute, but let's go back to the beginning of the week. We last recorded the podcast from about this spot at the end of last week, so therefore what's happened since then? Monday we got tributes from his grandchildren, from William and Harry. Just explain how that happened and how there was a 30-minute gap between one statement coming out and then the next.
So both written statements from the Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex, and with the Duke of Cambridge's tribute, there was a lovely new still release, wasn't there, of a very little 2-year-old Prince George on the back of a carriage with his great-grandfather, the Duke of Edinburgh, and that had been taken in 2015 at Sandringham by the Duchess of Cambridge. So another really lovely nod to the family man there.
Yep. The photo was amazing, wasn't it? He said, I feel lucky not to have had his example to guide me, but his enduring presence well into my own adult life. But here's the bit where he spoke about that, the carriage. I will never take for granted the special memories my children will always have of their great-grandpa coming to collect them in his carriage and seeing for themselves his infectious sense of adventure as well as his mischievous sense of humour. So quite a personal note, I think, from Prince William.
And both of them referring to him as Grandpa, and William at the end of his tribute saying, we will miss my grandpa, but I know he would want us to get on with the job. And we'll come to it later, but there is a nod in the in the funeral service, where it sort of seems like the Duke of Edinburgh was trying to say to everyone, it is now time to get on with the job.
And he also said, William, didn't he, on Monday, that he would do what you wanted, will look after the Queen.
Yeah.
And I think, as you know, you will probably, I'm sure, have seen the image of the solitary Queen standing or sitting inside St George's Chapel without her family next to her. I mean, if you haven't seen it, where have you been? But take a look at it now. And the Queen sitting there. I mean, she wasn't in her household bubble. She's lost, clearly, her household bubble. But everyone else from her family were sitting 2 metres apart. But she cut a very lonely figure in the chapel, didn't she?
It was one of the most poignant images, wasn't it? Seeing the Queen sitting there on her own, separated from the rest of her family. Of course, everything done under COVID guidelines, and it was a very moving image to see.
So that was William's statement, and also Harry as well.
Also
this was also Monday, wasn't it? About half an hour later?
Half an hour later, and I thought the tone in the messages was quite notably different. Harry paying tribute to his grandpa, master of the barbecue, legend of banter, and cheeky right till the end.
Master of the barbecue.
Wow.
I quite like that one.
I love that one. It's great, isn't it?
Exactly. But he also started with, my grandfather was a man of service, of honour, of great humour. He was authentically himself with a serious, sharp wit. So statements from the grandchildren. So if you remember from last week, we had Prince Charles on Saturday. On the Sunday, both Prince Andrew and Prince Edward and Philip's daughter-in-law, Sophie Wessex, also spoke. And then Monday we had these two messages from William and Harry. And clearly a lot to be said about that relationship and what happened at the end of the isolation period that Harry had here before he went to the funeral on Saturday afternoon.
And it was on that Monday that we had it confirmed that Prince Harry had arrived back in the UK from California. He'd arrived to begin his quarantine so that he could
staying just down there,
attend.
actually, didn't he?
Yeah, staying
why don't we
just
show everyone? Let's go that
walk.
way and show everyone the long walk. A little twist around, so you can see the long walk here, which on a nice sunny Sunday evening as it is at the moment, you can see why it's called the long walk, because people are walking on it and it's quite long. But just to the left of the path is a bunch of trees, and just behind those trees you go into the Frogmore estate, and that is where Frogmore Cottage is, which was, as you well know, Harry and Meghan's house. It's now home to Eugenie and Jack, but Harry stayed there because it's still their official, they said to us, didn't they, it was still their official home. This is where they will come when they come back to the UK.
Yeah, it remains,
if Meghan comes back to the UK.
Remains their UK residence.
Yeah.
And he has been staying there with his cousin Princess Eugenie, her husband Jack Brooksbank, and a lovely opportunity for Harry not only to spend some quality family time, which he hasn't done for a year now, but also to meet baby August, which would have been the first time that he'd have got to meet him.
August or August, we don't quite know, do we?
Yeah.
Still,
but I think really nice for him to actually come back and have some proper family time here.
A very neat segue actually into one of the pictures that we got this week, which was Prince Philip with his 7 great-grandchildren at the time. Baby August/August wasn't there, of course, but this was a picture that they released. Now, can you name the 7 great-grandchildren?
I can.
From left to right, can you remember the picture?
This photograph was taken in Balmoral, and it's
in what year, 2018?
2018,
Yep.
yeah. The Queen and the Duke surrounded by 7 of their great-grandchildren, and it's really lovely. And you've got Prince George, you've got a very, very little Prince Louis sitting on the Queen's lap. You've got Princess Charlotte with, I don't know what she's doing, she looks like she's sort of saying flash to the
Always
camera,
the
and
star
she's
of the
holding
show, yes.
little Louis's hand. You've got Savannah behind
I hope you get the order right, because then I won't be able to correct you. Savannah.
And then you've got Isla, and she has got baby Lena on her lap, and to the right of her you've got Mia Tyndall.
And that picture, it was like after Monday when they said that they were remembering the Navy man. Tuesday, I think, was when they released that picture. This is all about the family man.
We're remembering the family man, the man at the centre of the family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An additional picture was released at the same time, which was Prince William, Kate, Queen, Prince Philip, and a very young-looking Princess Charlotte, wasn't it? And that
yes, Charlotte, a baby, and it's really sweet. She's looking directly at the Queen, and yeah, a nice nod to the family man.
Of course, we say every week, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be seeing this picture right now. If, however, you're listening to this podcast, however you listen to podcasts, running, walking, cleaning, dusting, whatever it is you do, then you know where to find all of these pictures, which is on our Instagram page at ITV News Royals. So the other 2 pictures also released while we're on pictures was Prince Charles with his father in 1966.
1966.
World Cup year for anyone who knows their football history in England, and it was also a year when Prince Charles had a picture with his father. That was released to show, again, family man playing polo, as well as an additional one we're showing you now, which is of Prince Charles and Camilla with Prince Philip, and that was taken at the royal wedding in 2011.
Yeah, the Cambridge's wedding in 2011. So as you say, a day to sort of honour the family man, and I think that was very much what we saw at the funeral service as well on Saturday.
I mentioned just now before family man, they had a day when they remembered the Navy man. We did an interview about 4 years ago with a chap called Norman Richardson. Now he was on board HMS Whelp, so a Second World War destroyer. It's in the sea off the Pacific. Norman Richardson is a gunner on an airplane in the what's the Navy's the air arm called? Fleet air arm. There we go. The Navy's Fleet air arm. And he had just completed a bombing mission over Sumatra, Japanese-held Sumatra, in 1945. Got hit, crashed into the sea. It's a great story, this one, and he'll explain it to you. And who came along and scooped him out of the sea? Well, HMS Whelp. And who was in charge of HMS Whelp? Well, Lieutenant Philip, as he referred to himself. So have a listen to what Norman Richardson told us about 4 years ago.
We were flying over Sumatra and did raids on the oil refineries, were picked up by HMS Whelp and got out and greeted by Prince Philip. Welcome aboard the Whelp.
Now, Norman Richardson has since passed. We had permission from his family to play that interview. He was quite aged at the time, I remember, something like 94, 95, you know, and sadly, and I think we also remember from this funeral a number of those people, the generation of the Second World War, we are losing them all the time. And of course, with Prince Philip, a veteran of the Second World War, we lost another one last week. What else happened in the week? Flowers, a very small bunch, a collection of flowers there at the moment, but they are still carefully collected and they're moved up. They didn't want to create so many bunches here that there would be a crowd of people. Did we tell people about the watermelon last week? I kind of feel like...
I can't remember, but that's...
Okay,
that's
on my Twitter, which we'll show you now, and again, if you're on your podcasting, go onto my Twitter, you will find a picture of the most amazingly carved watermelon, which instead of a bunch of flowers was left, and in some parts of the world, I think somebody said it's in Thailand, it's a skill that people have, and it was quite amazing. We're showing you the picture at the moment, and I think you'll agree, if you're watching it and seeing it, it is quite something. The flowers that were left in London, however, outside Buckingham Palace, were moved to...
Marlborough House Gardens.
And who went to Marlborough House on
Wednesday? Prince of Wales and
Wednesday?
Duchess of Cornwall went to visit the flowers and see some of the messages that members of the public had written, which was really nice. There was a really very sweet card, actually, which, if you can talk more about the flowers, I'll find and I'll read the message.
So when we were talking about the flowers, there was also a little Land Rover there. So they were at Marlborough House, which is just quite close to Clarence House, which is their London residence. I think it's the home of the Commonwealth, isn't it, Marlborough House? And they viewed the flowers. There's a little toy Land Rover on the step. I think, again, this is why you need to be watching on YouTube, because we're showing you the Land Rover at the moment. But very similar to what was released that day, which was the Land Rover that would and did carry the coffin on the Saturday. But Charles and Camilla... Look, well, I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, they were very moved by the messages of support for the Queen.
Clearly, and lots of messages, but one really sweet one that stood out to us from 7-year-old Sia, and it said, "Dear Queen, I'm very sorry that your husband Prince Philip has died. We love you, and please give us a call if you need to talk about anything or need a friend."
How old was Sia?
Sia's 7.
I think we need to find Sia. If anyone knows where
That's
Sia is.
sweet.
So what did she say? Please give us a call if you need to
Please
chat.
give us a call if you need to talk about anything or need a friend.
That's very sweet.
It's
if
a
Sia's
very
watching,
sweet sentiment.
please get in touch. You know how, I hope, via our social media. We had Edward and Sophie sing some flowers here. Again, so we just explained how the flowers from this spot got taken up to outside St George's Chapel, and the Queen's youngest son, Prince Edward, his wife Sophie Wessex, their daughter Lady Louise, went and viewed those flowers. You were the person that filmed that, weren't you?
I was in there with them, yep. And
so
it's
set
sort of
that scene for us.
It's, I mean, a huge number of flowers in there. Like, I think you described it as that the Land Rover was going to drive past a sort of carpet
like
of flowers,
carpet,
and it did actually look like that in there. You're probably looking at the images now, and they took their time to walk right through them up towards the Galilee porch, which is the entrance that the Queen used on Saturday, and they stopped, read some of the messages, and then they got up to the top near the porch, and that's where some of the more wreaths from the Prime Minister, the Archbishop of Canterbury, countries had sent wreaths as well.
So, Canadian one there was a New Zealand for the people of New Zealand, wasn't there, and the wreaths. I say that the flowers looked a little, they were looking a little like they had been there for a week, as flowers do, but as we said to you, everything that was collected here was placed up there, and in fact they were quite sort of neatly placed, weren't they?
They were really
the
carefully placed, and it seemed it was like a really nice way of including the public in Saturday's proceedings, given that they normally in normal times would have been able to see something, and it was all done behind palace walls.
It would have been a public facing
so it was nice
moment,
in some way to have a nod to the public within the castle walls, and that was it.
Right, before we go on to the funeral itself, let's talk about, I think this is Thursday night, isn't it, when they released a picture of, or Friday, sorry, they released a picture of the Queen, which the Queen had chosen herself from her private photo album, which is a picture of her and her husband in 2003. Before digital photography, I think Sophie Wessex herself took it, and they were on top of the Coils of Mick, which is a big hill, I'm not going to say a little hill, big hill, even a mountain you might call it, on the Balmoral estate in Aberdeenshire. About a 3-hour walk from Balmoral, I worked out when I went on my Google Maps the other day. I don't know whether the Queen and the Duke walked it. I suspect they might well have done it, but they could have also gone in a Land Rover, as we once did. Remember when we went round?
We did. It's absolutely
stunning part of the world.
Beautiful scenery, and we know that for the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, and much of the family, Balmoral in the Scottish Highlands is one of their favourite, most treasured places to spend time. They always go up there in the summer, and they look incredibly relaxed and happy in the photograph, and it's a really lovely way for us all to be able to see them kind of on the eve of the funeral.
And chosen by the Queen, and a Queen who thought that was the photo that she wanted released on the eve of her husband's funeral. Let's move to funeral day, because it was just moving to be part of a moment of British history. Prince Philip, the longest serving consort, just the inside the castle and the chapel that's been part of royal history for centuries. To see what went on yesterday close up was quite something, wasn't it?
Yeah, as I said, it was incredibly moving. From the moment, the moment that really caught me was when the Land Rover first drove into the quadrangle under the arch, before the coffin had been placed on top of it, and all the representatives from the military were already lining the quadrangle, and it drove into the most beautiful music and drove around it with all the military with their heads bowed, and I thought that was a really poignant moment.
Yeah, and so I think probably now is a good time to pause. We are going to play you our summary, I think is probably the best word, of what happened on Saturday afternoon. This is what we aired to viewers on the Saturday evening. You'll see the picture clearly if you're watching, but if you're just listening, I think it also you capture the moment, you capture the feeling of what was going on inside St George's Chapel, and this is our 6 minutes and 20 seconds, I think, summary
something like that, yeah,
of the hour and a half events on Saturday afternoon, which all began at about 2:30 p.m. From the moment the green Land Rover drove quietly into the quadrangle of this great castle, it was every inch Prince Philip's funeral. The service detachments, his detachments, who had assembled here moments before, bowed their heads. The coffin emerged from the state entrance on the shoulders of 8 Grenadier Guardsmen. And a reminder, if one were needed, that this was not just a military funeral. The children and grandchildren of the Duke of Edinburgh lined up behind. And then, from the sovereign's entrance, his widow. With a lady in waiting beside her, it was a moment, just for once, for the Queen to follow her husband. It is private grief lived in the public domain. The royal family has been here before, but when they stepped off, the Duke reminded them of his happy moments, carriage driving, his ponies were there, so too his cap and gloves and his red pot for sugar lumps. On the coffin, a wreath from the Queen and a simple message, in loving memory. And from the rest of the family waiting at the chapel, a bow of heads. In this past week, they have all pledged to look after the Queen. And as she walked alone into St George's Chapel, a moment's pause, so she could go inside with others. At the West Steps, a new bearer party found by the Royal Marines, whose job was to carry their former Captain General and stop for the National Minute's silence. For the Queen, she does have her family to provide some of that support, however hard today was for many of them. And it might also be a moment to reflect on the tensions of the last year for his grandsons William and Harry. Perhaps Prince Philip's funeral will provide the opportunity for some much needed coming together. So clearly, I mean, we'll talk about the William and Harry situation in just a moment, but I think what most people will take from that is the widow Queen. And it sort of struck me earlier that we haven't had a Queen that's been widowed since 1861, when Victoria lost Albert, and now the Queen has lost Philip. And I think people will look back. Yes, he had a long life. Yes, he was 99 years of age. Yes, you know, he led a life that many other people simply could not dream of. But I think if you look at it in terms of history, it was a day of history because this was the moment that the longest reigning monarch lost or said goodbye to the longest serving consort.
Yeah, although I think, yes, it's a moment in history. Yes, it's a moment that millions of people tuned in to watch. And, you know, yes, he's been married to the Queen for 73 years. But it also felt incredibly personal yesterday, from all the little details to the fact that actually there were only 30 people in the kind of the intimate part of St George's Chapel, the choir. And that, you know, the 30 people that were the closest people to him were there to say their goodbyes, and that image of the Queen sitting there on her own, I mean, that was really moving, I thought. There were several, weren't there? There was as she watched the coffin, as you have just seen, and then that being lowered into a royal vault which George III initially commissioned, and he himself lies in there with two other monarchs. I mean, so much royal history, and that's currently where Queen Elizabeth's beloved Philip is now in his final resting place. Beloved Philip, her strength and stay, as she called him. And his coffin was covered in his flag, which was again a personal nod to him. It's quartered into four, and it represents, the different quarters represent his Greek, Denmark, Mountbatten and Edinburgh, so all links to his life. And on top of that was a wreath from the Queen with the words "in loving memory" and his naval cap and sword. So all these really personal details threaded throughout the service. What good might have come of the funeral, perhaps, was the fact that afterwards we saw William and Harry in conversation. We don't know
Maybe we'll find out in the next few days, but we don't know if they met before the funeral service. And the royal family have been very clear with us that they're not going to give us any sort of running commentary and all the personal stuff. But the facts we know is Prince Harry was here on Monday, stayed at Frogmore Cottage. He was at the funeral on Saturday afternoon and walked in the procession, as you just saw, behind the Land Rover. And then after the church service, William and Harry were seen coming out, talking. Clearly, everyone's focusing on that at the moment, as perhaps did the funeral, was it a trigger for the two of them to try and heal some of the quite deep wounds that have been created over the past year?
Yeah, there's images of them coming out of the chapel, the three of them, Prince William, Prince Harry and the Duchess of Cambridge, all sort of gathering together, talking before they walked up the hill.
Yes, like the old days when it was William and Kate, and then Harry, the younger brother, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was quite like that. And then I think a lot of people noticed how Catherine pulled back a little bit and just let William and Harry have that conversation.
And if Saturday was about family and, you know, the family paying their respects to the Duke of Edinburgh and saying their goodbyes, then that can only be a good thing, that members of the family were coming back together and sort of united in that moment. And I don't think, you know, everyone would be pleased to see that moment, I think.
So national mourning has now finished in the UK. It ended at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, so the 8 o'clock on the day after the funeral. You can see here Buckingham Palace, the flag being raised back to full mast after a week and a bit of national mourning. Royal mourning, however, goes on to, is it Thursday or Friday?
Royal mourning is 2 weeks, so a little bit longer than national mourning, and members of the royal family will only do things if considered appropriate. So I actually expect this week for us to hear or see very little from the royal family, even though it is the Queen's 95th birthday on the 21st of April, which is on Wednesday.
Yes, which we should refer to, and obviously life goes on and people in public places fall over and children cry. Just as they have done for many, many centuries. So yes, the Queen's 95th birthday on Wednesday. I suspect the palace will choose not to mark that in a way if she's in national mourning. And it's perhaps sometimes it's the days after the funeral that are more difficult than the days before the funeral because of all the preparations that need to be done. It's only the kind of, or dare I say, emptiness that sometimes hits people who have recently been bereaved in the days afterwards. So I suspect that on her 95th birthday on Wednesday there won't be anything from the palace.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, you know, the Queen, as you say, although it was very much Prince Philip's funeral service, he'd sort of designed how he wanted it to be, and the Queen did have to sign off all those plans, so she has been very involved in that in the week leading up to it. So perhaps this is the time for her to take that step back, that moment, to reflect on what's just happened.
Just very quickly, because there was a report in the week the Queen had gone back to work or gone back to duties. She actually said goodbye to her departing Lord Chamberlain and said hello to her newly arriving Lord Chamberlain. So Earl Peel was the old Lord Chamberlain. The new Lord Chamberlain is a chap called Andrew Parker, now Lord Parker, former boss of the MI5 security service, incidentally. He'll probably have a few stories he could share with the Queen. But she did that in the week. They had an audience of her, to use the correct expression. So she kind of was at work, but this is an additional week of royal mourning. So I suppose we wait now to see which member of the royal family will be the first member of the royal family to actually go back to work.
Yeah, I think, but I think we've seen, you know, over the last week or so, the family really rally around the Queen and support her, and I think we will continue to see that. And I suspect that when the Queen does come back to public duties, and of course she will, you know, she said in the speech on her 21st birthday that she would, you know, life be it long or short, she would serve, and we will see her back to work, I would expect. But I also think we'll see members of the family step up to be by her side in support.
I mean, it's difficult to know where to say goodbye to you from a sunny evening here in Windsor. It's currently Sunday evening here. We hopefully get this podcast out to you at the beginning of the week. Perhaps a good place to leave is how we ended our special programme yesterday, and we put some of this on our social media pages, but the poet laureate Simon Armitage wrote a special poem for Prince William, and he did an exclusive recording. He recited his poem for us. We put that poem to picture. So we're going to play that to you now, and I think it's probably a fitting way to end.
I do. I totally agree.
Okay,
yeah.
so this is The Patriarchs by Simon Armitage, the Poet Laureate. We'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you for watching.
The weather in the window this morning is snow, unseasonal singular flakes, a slow winter's final shiver. On such an occasion, to presume to eulogise one man is to pipe up for a whole generation, that crew whose survival was always the stuff of minor miracle, who came ashore in orange crate coracles, fought ingenious wars, finagled triumphs at sea with flaming decoy boats and sidestepped torpedoes. Husbands to duty, they unrolled their plans across billiard tables and vehicle bonnets, regrouped at breakfast. What their secrets were was everyone's guess and nobody's business. Great-grandfathers from birth, in time they became both inner core and outer case in a family heirloom of nesting dolls. Like evidence of early man, their boot prints stand in the hardened earth of rose beds and borders. They were sons of a zodiac out of sync with the solar year, but turned their minds to the day's big science and heavy questions. To study their hands at rest was to picture maps showing hatchet valleys and indigo streams, schemes of old campaigns and reconnaissance missions. Last of the great avuncular magicians, they kept their best tricks for the grand finale, disproving immortality and disappearing entirely. Major oaks in the wood start tuning up, and skies to come will deliver their tributes. But for now, a cold April's closing moments parachute slowly home, so by mid-afternoon, snow is recast as seed heads and thistledown.